Welcome everyone. I have a new build guide for you all today. This is an idea that I've been sitting on for a while, but haven't had the opportunity to put together with all the focus I've been putting on my little speed project on the uncapped demon form. But I had the chance to put this together the other day, and it's actually working a lot better than I expected. And that is an Infernalist version of Doedre's Undoing. So Doedre's Undoing is a new support gem which you can apply to curses, and effectively what it does is upon putting down a curse, it creates a cursed ground which acts as a hazard, and if a monster is within that curse's area, the curse explodes, deals a bunch of damage, and that's effectively what you're seeing in the background here. Now, what's different about this build and the idea I had is I really wanted to try and put a unique Infernalist spin on the build. So this isn't new tech in the sense of there are plenty of blood mages and lich builds out there at the moment, but there doesn't seem to be anything for the Infernalist. And the Infernalist Ascendancy actually offers quite some interesting options which provide an opportunity to set something up which is very unique to the Infernalist itself. And what that is we are going to be stacking int, mana, life, and energy shield. We're just going all in. And even in this video that you can see of the map in the background, you can see I am sitting on a mana pool of over 10,000 at the moment. And I'm using my life as my spell casting. So I'll dive into all the tech. There's a lot of moving pieces in this build, and it's really interesting how it's put together, at least I feel so. But actually, let's just dive straight into it. I think the best way is just to explain it. So very quickly first, Doedre's Undoing, this is the support I was telling about. It applies a cursed ground to a curse, creates an explosion, which has a base damage of 200% of your intelligence, and that's important to remember. So the damage of Doedre's Undoing, the dark design, which is an explosion, is 200% of our intelligence. So that's where our first pillar out of 3.5, 4 pillars starts, and that is stacking int. Arguably the primary objective is to get as much int as possible. Scaling the base damage of any ability is the biggest source of damage you can get on an ability. Everything else, spell damage, multipliers, additive sources, they all build upon that base damage. So the higher you can get the base damage, the more damage you can deal. So intelligence is the #1 priority. Secondly, intelligence also gives you mana. So that's the second pillar that we're trying to build up, is our mana. And that is because we are also running Archmage. And what that does is it is a spirit-based buff, which gives us 4% extra lightning damage for every 100 mana that we have. So another source of damage. Third pillar is life. And there are multiple facets as to why life is important. So first and foremost is Wrathpith. And the only line on this item that we are interested in terms of this build is the bottom one, which is non-channeling spells deal 10% extra or increased damage per 100 life. That is our main and, well, pretty much primary source of increased damage is from this Sacred Globe. Furthermore, and this is where we really lean into the ascendancy, is we are very heavily using the life conversion nodes within the ascendancy. And first of those is Baedet's Gaze, which gives us more mana for the more life we have. Again, remember, we're stacking mana as well to get more Archmage damage. And Beidet's Hand, which gives us more energy shield for the more life we have. Now you go, well, energy shield, that's got nothing to do with the int or the mana that we've talked about so far. Well, it does, because then we are furthermore using Eldritch Battery, I apologize, and that converts our energy shield to mana. So more life is more energy shield, which is more mana, which is more Archmage damage. And even more on top, so if we don't just look at damage sources, we then also take Mind over Matter. And what that means is it turns our mana, which we're stacking, into our effective HP pool. We take damage from mana instead of life. Now, the first thing you may worry about is, well, we're casting very quick, as you saw in the video. Curses and the supports cost a lot. You know, is that a little bit dangerous using mana as our HP pool? Well, that's where then another aspect of the build comes in, and that is we're using tech rods. This is quite simply just a super easy way to get infinite mana, for lack of a better way of putting, and to solve our mana issues. We convert or use life tap on our curse. So we are going to be casting our curse through life. And then the regen from tech rods acts as a much better regen source for our spell casting than ever focusing on any sort of mana regen recovery. So as you saw in the video, and just to quickly demonstrate again, the regen takes a while to build up. So when you start a map, you just have to take your time a little bit. But it starts to ramp up to a point where then you can just start spamming it. If I actually go into the demon form, get a bit more extra cast speed, you can get to a point where you can just infinitely spam it without any problems about running out of resources. And how this works nicely is now obviously our spell casting is separate to our effective HP from the mana. So we've got a nice big fat HP pool in the mana, which is essentially sitting there untouched. And then furthermore, you may go, well, in the video you had a lot more mana than the 6,000 odd that we have here. Well, then we also run Mana Remnants, which allows our mana to overflow every time we pick up these globes, which drop the remnants from mobs. Since we're using Archmage, which is this lightning-based damage, it just inherently does a lot of shock damage, and these globes drop all the time. You pick them up, and overflow allows you to get to 1.5 times your maximum. So if we're sitting at around 6,000, we can get technically to about 9. I also run a Headhunter at a top-end setup, which you can steal some buffs from rare mobs, which allow you to get even more mana. So I haven't died yet on the build, and it feels super tanky. And if that wasn't enough, another synergy is, although we're not running a unlimited demon form stack variation here, because we're so reliant on these two conversions, so that immediately takes up already 6 points, so we only got 2 left. But even then, for just the 10 stack version of demon form, we still get 30% more damage. We get 25% increased cast speed, and the life loss from the 10 stacks, which doesn't seem like much, but it's enough to be a bit of a hassle. 185 life per second. Well, because we're using tech rods to handle our spell casting, it also inherently handles the just maintaining permanently the 10 stack of demon form from this. So as you can see, and hopefully you agree with me, it is quite a unique setup for Doedres, which I think is quite different from the blood mages and liches out there. Whether it's better or not, I don't want to argue. From what I have seen in videos, I'm no expert on Doedres I'm doing, but it seems comparable, at least in what I'm doing. And it's a lot of fun. So, you know, it's a unique spin, something no other ascendancy can do due to the fact that we've got these conversions and can really, I dare say, stack mana a lot more efficiently than other classes, I think. Don't quote me on that. If that was all a lot to take in, I have created a chart here. So as you can see, there's a lot going on. We've got our 3 resources: life, energy, shield, and mana. We've got life and strength, which can increase our life. We've got the armor on the energy shield on our armor. It is an important point to highlight that only the inherent energy shield value that you see in your armor, say up here, is counted towards the Eldritch battery conversion. Any investment into, say, increased maximum energy shield on your passive tree is not counted in Eldritch battery, so do not bother trying to invest into any percent increases of max energy shield anywhere. The increased rolls on gear are local to that gear, so they do count, but any passive tree or jewel or any other sources of increased energy shield do not count towards Eldritch battery. So this conversion of energy shield to mana, only the values that you get on your armor count. Going back to the chart, where were we? We've got discipline as well, which I'll very quickly jump into. I highly recommend. Not required. You could run a wand with just more spell damage and probably, I'd say, lightning damage, because Archmage takes up a bulk of the damage, more so than the inherent chaos damage that Doedre's Undoing does. But if you run a Stoic Scepter, I think I pronounced that right, Discipline is an aura it provides, and it provides maximum energy shield. So that converts directly into our mana. So it's a pretty significant source of mana, which in turn is more HP and more damage. But I'll do the gear breakdown a bit later. And then we've got intelligence and mana. So like I said, primary goal is to stack intelligence for our Doedre's base damage, but intelligence also gives mana, so there's that synergy as well. And then obviously just mana rolls and mana percentage rolls on gear and jewels we quite heavily focus on as well. So there are 6 sort of things we're looking for, and then the way they all tie in with each other is we have our life conversions going to our energy shield, and then our energy shield goes to mana through, I didn't label it here, Eldritch Battery. We've got our life converting directly to mana. We've got our life affecting the spell damage on Wrathpith. We've got our mana tying into Archmage damage. We've got mana tying into our effective HP pool with Mind Over Matter. So you can see everything that's going on in this setup and why it's very unique to the Infernalist and was a lot of fun to put together. It was an idea I've been sitting on for a while, and it actually works a lot better than I thought it would. So that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't blame you if that goes over people's heads a little bit, but hopefully I've explained that as well as I could have. Now to break it down a little bit and just look at the specific pieces of gear and passives, just to make it a bit easier to digest what we're focusing on. So very firstly, the 2 mandatory pieces, I would say, and the only mandatory pieces are Wrathpith. Quite simply, this is a big source of damage. We are stacking, although life isn't our primary goal, we are still stacking quite a substantial amount. I've got personally a bit over 3,000 max life, so that 3,300 increased damage. So, and we don't really have increased damage sources anywhere else. That is a 3-time multiplier, and we can even just quickly look at that. And this is a little tip. The way to check your Doedre's damage is to press Alt over any chaos damage or spell damage node in your passive tree. Unfortunately, there's no way through the gem itself to have a look. If we have a look here, there's no way to actually look at what damage Doedre is currently set at. So what you do is you go to passive tree, mouse over any sort of spell damage node or chaos damage node and press Alt, and it will show you the damage per second. So if we can see here, 64,000. If I take off Rathpith, that drops right down to 22. So like I said, the map actually checks out about a 3-time increase in damage just from this focus itself. So it's a big source of damage. Our next big source of damage is Archmage. So similarly, if we look here, 64,000, I've turned off Archmage. 20,000, also almost a 3-time multiplier. So they're two big sources of damage. So that's why life is important, int is important for the base damage, and it also ties into mana. We're stacking mana for the Archmage. And I won't keep repeating it. Hopefully it's sunk in. So mandatory piece, the Sacred Globe, 3 times, at least a 3-time multiplier in your damage. Nothing else on this really matters. I'd probably recommend trying to get a second socket or getting probably more ideally, a corrupted roll, which increases this potentially up to 12% increased damage per 100. But this is one of the more expensive items, at least in terms of the starter setup. So simply getting any version would be great. Second mandatory piece is our Tech Rods Undying Hate jewel. We need this to solve our spell casting costs. So, and like I said, and less importantly, our demon form stacks. It's nice to separate our spell casting resource from our effective HP pool. So we've essentially swapped our life and mana around using this jewel and mind over matter. So they're the 2 mandatory pieces. Beyond that, in terms of our starter setup, I've broken down this in Maxroll as well into 2 variations. So a beginner setup would be, I highly recommend Stoic Scepter. You just want to focus on mana, int, mana regen. Always good to have a little bit of regen for our mana, which is our life effectively, and strength. These tend to be relatively cheap. Mostly scepters are used for minion builds, which want plus levels to minions. So getting scepters without that tend to be quite cheap. So strength, intelligence, mana regen, max mana, a little bit of extra spirit doesn't hurt, although we don't really, I think we may need about 20% or so actually, technically, if you want to run a companion, which I'd recommend, but you don't need to. So you can see here I'm down to 8 spirit. So a little bit of extra spirit roll on the scepter would be good if you run a companion, but not mandatory. I'll dive into the skills later, so don't worry about me flushing that up for now. And it's a similar theme throughout the rest of the pieces. Max life, max mana, intelligence, resistances, max life. On your chest, it's really good to get the increased maximum life. I believe that's an essence roll. But again, intelligence, resistances, max life, gloves, intelligence, max life, max mana, resistances. It's the same everywhere. Max life, max mana, intelligence. All attributes on rings is good as well. Mana regen is good. Get some resistances as well. Belt doesn't roll intelligence, but you can get strength, which gets more life. Again, resistances, and it's the same everywhere. Life, mana, intelligence. I'm just going to sound like a broken record. The one item worth highlighting a little bit more, singling out, is the amulet, and there the difference is, again, the other stuff that we talked about, but in particular getting the increased intelligence percentage and getting that in combination. So more than the other pieces, I would highly concentrate on getting all attributes tier 1, intelligence tier 1, and increased intelligence tier 1, and then putting on attribute catalysts. So you can see the 20% attribute modifiers here, and that bumps up all three of these. So I've got a tier 2 here, but these amulets, if you also get max life, max mana, you can even get a max life percentage roll here. They start to get a little bit expensive. Can't remember what this cost me. I think it was 2 or 3 div or so. But those three in particular, those three suffixes in particular, in combination with the attribute catalyst modifier. And that's it. So that's it in terms of the basic starter setup. Tech rods and Rathbiff, I think together will cost you about 15 div. All these other pieces, I put this build together in half a day using some leftover currency, and I don't think I spent more than one maybe 2 div maximum, I think, on the amulet for any of the other pieces. So all up, to give a rough figure, 25-30 div maybe to get a starter set up and be quite effective. If you want to get more advanced, 3 socket gloves, really massive increase in cast speed, getting 3 socket gloves with increased effect of socketed items. Again, still trying to get max life. Ideally, this would have intelligence on it instead of the resistances probably, but these gloves start to get quite expensive and hard to craft specific things. So I don't want to bog you down to details. Just giving you options. Headhunter, I just love this item. The amount of buffs that you get stolen from rare mobs when you're flying through maps is ridiculous. So good value if you can afford it, but this is very much top end. I think headhunters are around 70 divs these days. And then again, another expensive 3 socket pair of boots, which is just a massive source of movement speed with the increased effect of socket items and the movement speed sockets put in. So they're the more advanced options, those 3. Everything else pretty much remains the same. Real top end, and this applies to almost every build, so it's not really worth singling out too much, but a rite of passage, but this costs a lot. I think it's about 150 div. Spirit of the Stag especially, I quite rely on the increased elemental resistances as well, but then skill speed, movement speed, extra damage as lightning, just all the benefits, and it's almost 100% uptime on this. Another nice to have is a Fall of the Axe Onslaught, and then running like chilled maps and grasping vine maps, getting a bit of extra movement speed and I think skill speed as well from having uptime on this, and then Frozen Charm. So that's it in terms of the gear. You're just trying to solve resistances with your sockets. If you've got room to spare, you can throw in things like plus 10 to intelligence. Again, main focus is really trying to get intelligence on all the rolls. I think you can see here intelligence. I believe I've got it everywhere except for these pieces because I've carried them over from my existing build, so I didn't build them specifically for this build, but they're just too high value with the 3 sockets and what they achieve to not bother with the intelligence on there. But you can see in the starter pieces I suggested, intelligence is there. As a gear breakdown, so passive tree, we do go off down here, but I'll start off of the beginning, the important pieces, highlighting important nodes. So insightfulness, 6% increase to intelligence, super high value. This cluster is really good for increasing the area effect of our curse, so almost mandatory this cluster. We parv all the way up, pick up a jewel socket. We need mind over matter to turn our mana into our HP. High value intelligence node here in Ingenuity. Increase maximum mana from raw mana. Etherflow, parving through here to get through to Eldritch Battery. Eldritch Battery converts our ES to mana, and Etherflow is just a good source of mana regeneration. Or you could save arguably a few points by just going to this 1 point here and linking down and just avoiding all this mana regen if you want to. And I actually may do that because I'm just finding I don't really take damage all that often. Everything just dies instantly, so I may actually do that to save 3 points. One thing to highlight on the tech rods, it is good to get a conquered attribute. Passive skills also grant plus 8 intelligence. These I think is a bit slept on, or maybe just a lot of builds just don't rely on the attributes all that much. I don't think there's too many attribute stacking builds out there. So these cost pretty much about the same, if maybe just marginally. One annulment may be more expensive than just a normal tech rods, but what that means is it's minor, but these two travel nodes that go through the tech rods radius get +8 intelligence. So we get +16 intelligence effectively for free by having that concrete attribute line on our tech rods dual. We could potentially, if we remove these points from here, just pick up these two travel nodes for 13 intelligence each. So increase that base damage of Doedres. And then we're just parving down the right hand side here, picking up dual sockets. We pick up this life recovery and life regenerate cluster simply to help out our tech rods a little bit. I may test it out. This may not be required if you're really trying to min-max, but it helps, and since we're parving by it. Then there is a bunch of movement speed nodes which I've picked up, which for a starter setup you can very much ignore. This is, as anyone that's been following on my videos, really love having no skill penalty when I'm moving around. If I just ramp up my spell casting a little bit. So as I move around, you can see I'm not slowing down as I'm casting, so that's what that provides. And since we're using tech rods where you need to kind of keep casting to maintain your regen, having that reduced movement penalty helps in just moving around and getting through maps quicker. So that's nice, and that's through this node here, this cluster here, and this cluster predominantly. And then there's some movement speed and skill speed here, here, and here. But they are all ultimately optional. And if you're setting this up at a lower level, say level 80 or thereabouts, you probably will be dropping those nodes and just building into them as you get into the 90 pluses. If you do take this cluster up here, you could get Against the Darkness with percentage increase per notable. This is probably the only place where I could justify putting something like this, 2 notables, so that's 6% extra intelligence, which we're super focused on stacking. And then most importantly, navigating all the way down here to pick up 2 things, which is Gem Enthusiast, which gives us a 3-fold, well, primarily a 2-fold benefit from the percentage increase to life and mana. But also, like I said, I like to stack movement speed as well, so it's just getting benefit from all 3 lines on this. And then percentage increase to attributes, which gives us more strength, and intelligence, which gives us more life, mana, and then more mana again through our life conversion. So this good high value node through polymathy as well. Finally, we're anointing our very important node, which is Impending Doom. And that is for our faster curse activation. And now this is a subject worth discussing in and of itself, and where probably the most fiddly part of the build comes in. If the rest wasn't fiddly enough for you. The reason faster curse activation is important is when we put down Curse Ground and we want the explosion to go off from Doedre's Undoing, it is important for the curse to activate as quick as possible. So as you place it down on a monster, the hazard, in air quotes, effect from Doedre's, the hazard effect gets triggered practically immediately. I believe there is a pair of boots that you could potentially run and may be justifiable in a beginner setup, which gives you immediate activation of curses. I can't remember the name of the boots. So that is one option, but otherwise what you need to do is you need to get this node and then get as close to 100% without touching 100% or going over, because it's actually bugged. So important, do not go to or over 100% faster curse activation, because it actually bugs out Doedre's. But with this node, we then pretty much all our empty dual sockets, which we were concentrating on, we are getting, this is probably an ideal example of a role that you want is faster curse activation with 2% increased intelligence. Craft these. Increased intelligence is a desecrated suffix. So what you try and do is you buy jewels which have an empty suffix with faster curse activation, which is be the most important thing. But then on top of that, if you can get it with area of effect for curses as well, bonus, super bonus if you can get spell damage or another 4th good roll. So what you do is you get a jewel with an empty suffix, and then you desecrate it, use an echo. I won't go into the details too much of crafting, as there's already enough bombardment of information in this video as it is. But these attribute desecrated mods roll almost at 100%, but it can roll strength or dex as well. So with an echo, you've got a 2 out of 3 chance to get your intelligence. If you get a 1%, you can then use a divine if you really want to bump it up even more. I actually had to think about 10 or 15 divines. That's where the majority of the cost of this build came for me, was actually re-rolling these jewels to balance my faster curse activation to get to, I think I actually managed to get to 99%, but 97, 98 is enough. So you get 40 through Impending Doom, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in my case. You could potentially get away with doing it in 4 if you're lucky, but you got 5 jewel sockets to try and balance the faster curse activation across those 5 to equal 58 or 59 plus that 40 to get to about 98, 99% faster curse activation. If that all seems like too much of a pain in the ass, I hear you. One thing that you could do, alternative options, like I said, all these movement speed and reduced cast penalty nodes, instead of doing that, if you don't care about movement speed and want to make your life easier, you could palm down through here and up through here. You then get the intelligence benefits along the way. And what this offers you is 10, 20, 30% extra faster curse activation, so totaling 70, and then you just need 214 or 114, 115% jewel, so it's a lot easier to set up if you actually just path through this passive cluster. So then you get 70 here, and like I said, then you can use 2 jewels, 2 14s, 114, 115 activation, and it's a lot easier to set up. So that's probably an easier starting point for most people. That is it in terms of the jewels. I don't think I have done, there's a Heart of the Well. This is again just a remnant of one of my old builds, but still super handy. Movement speed, skill speed, extra damage, life regen helps out with the tech rods. Everything else is really the faster cast, curse activation, and area of effect if you can get it for curses as well. But really trying to get the 2% increased intelligence as well on all of those jewels. So you're still focusing on those sapphires. Even if you get your faster curse activation, continue to use sapphires without the faster curse activation and get the 2% increased intelligence rolls on them. Whew. Okay, so we've covered that. Lastly, skills. Skills are actually probably the easiest out of any of the builds. There's a lot of crap in here from my existing builds, and that it still serves the purpose of trying to hit our 10 limit on every single attribute, and that is for, as I highlighted earlier, Gem Enthusiast. You need 10 support of each color to get the benefit from this node. So I've left in some of my old skills and just padded them with different colored attribute supports, so they mean absolutely nothing beyond hitting our requirements for Gem Enthusiast. But really the whole build is just these 4 abilities that you can see on my screen now. That is the Companion, Archmage, the Spare, and Mana Remnants. And I'd say the only important 3 are Archmage, the Spare, and Mana Remnants. So a little bit of starter versus advanced setups. I'll start with the curse being the primary thing that we're using and the most importance. I am personally using the spare, and most other Doedre undoing builds that you'll see out there use the spare because Doedre's undoing explosion is chaos damage. So if we just to confirm, chaos damage. So that is why we use the spare, because it reduces the mob's chaos resistance while doing that damage, which is fantastic. Just synergizes so well. The thing is, as I highlighted earlier, we are actually getting almost 2 times whatever the chaos damage is in lightning damage from Archmage. So we're actually having a lot more lightning damage. So in a starter setup, what I'd actually run is elemental weakness, because the bulk of the damage is actually lightning damage. But just to confuse you, in case this video isn't confusing enough as it was to this point, I do have an expensive support gem, which is Rakiatas, which inverses elemental resistances. So I am getting the maximum effect of elemental resistance inversion through this for the lightning damage portion, and then running the spare to reduce the resistance for the chaos damage portion. So I'm getting a double up effect. So that's all a little bit min-maxy, and like I said, this is a very expensive support. So if I really wanted to highlight this better, I would show it as such. You would run it like this with elemental weakness, because like I said, predominantly lightning damage from Archmage. We're using life tap importantly, because again, we don't want to, as I touched upon plenty of times at the beginning, we don't want to use mana as our resource for casting, and we've got tech rods, so life tap mandatory. And then I'm running spell cascade with controlled destruction. Now, plenty of the other videos have gone over this. If you're aware of the Doedre's undoing, there are a lot of bugs involved with it in terms of which supports work or not. The only thing I can suggest is using the tooltip from your passive tree to really test out whether a support adds damage or not. So for instance, controlled destruction, 25% more damage. If we look at this, it's 51,000. If I put this in, it does jump up to 64, so that support is working. There are a lot of damage supports out there which do not work. Spell Cascade for more AoE. I swapped this out with Zenith for bossing, and the last slot is pretty much open to, you'd probably run Zenith in there with the basic setup without Rakiatas actually. So you'd run this. One thing I didn't touch upon earlier is for all classes except for Blood Mage, who can set their spells base crit to 15. The base crit for Doedre's Undoing's Dark Design is 0, so there's no point doing any crit scaling in your passive tree, gear or supports. That's also why Controlled Destruction actually works well, because the downside of no crit hits has no effect anyway, so it's just a 25% more. I believe there's, no, that's it. So that would be a starter setup. Like I said, if you're more advanced, run Despair with Rakiatas. Archmage is pretty self-explanatory. You're pretty much just running this by itself, just a bit of extra levels with the Mastery support. And then Mana Remnants is super helpful for this mana stacking build. Obviously, the more mana and more overflow, the more HP we effectively have. Like I said, Doedre's with the lightning damage from Archmage does a lot of shock. So the 25% chance of Spawn Remnant on killing a mob with an elemental ailment triggers quite regularly, and you almost always get that overflow. And what you do is just pick up Harmonic Remnants to increase the chance of getting extra globes and potency, so just more mana from those globes. And that is it. Slightly more optional, as I said. Those who have seen my previous videos know I like this companion. You can get a Frozen Mandible. I'll try and dig up the link to an old video describing of how to pick this companion up and to tame it. But you try and get one with a haste aura, which gives increased cast speed and movement speed, but completely optional. You don't need this at all. And like I said, you could potentially get away without well, you still want to, well, you just, in the inherent spirit that you get from the scepter will be enough to cover element, getting Archmage and Mana Remnants, and then you probably have leftover spirit. Potentially another option could be to run Whispers of Doom. So yeah, apply an additional curve. Actually, the double activation delay may impact things, but running Blasphemy could be another option with another curse. With that, if the activation delay isn't an issue, you could run some sort of damage or cast on ailment or invocation. There's plenty of other options for what you could do with the leftover spirit. And that covers it. And I'll quickly just show what the build looks like running the starter setup. So the original video was with my more top end gear. So this is me running the more basic gear. And you can still see it just clears it, one-shots everything as it is as well. So still super effective. Like I said, about 25-30 div, I'd say. Let's see if I can get to a point where I'm actually killing things. 25 to 30 div, still super effective. The only thing I still haven't worked out with this build, I haven't got to it yet. I know there's some tech around offering, pardon me, offerings and a support which echoes effectively your curse around those offerings, increasing single target damage. There's also the potential to, like I said, drop the companion and run a cast on crit, or not crit, sorry, doesn't crit, but cast on ailments sort of set up to increase single target damage. But the single target damage, which I'll just show quickly as well on Xesht, isn't fantastic as is. But it just basically makes you have to do the boss mechanics a little bit, which is fun in itself after just one-shotting things endlessly for the last couple of weeks. You can still kill Xesht and other pinnacle bosses relatively quickly, as you can see, but you do have to play around the mechanics a little bit. But it's doable. I haven't tested it out, but Simulacrum, I'd imagine, with the massive amount of AoE and insta-kill it does to most pack mobs, would probably be super effective with this build, but still can handle all content. Anyway, thank you all. Bit of a change of direction in this video. Hopefully didn't get too carried away with all the details, but I do try and like to explain things clearly. And yeah, good luck and enjoy.